Hey everybody, it's Daniel, and welcome back to Spain to Go, the best podcast in the entire multiverse for all things Spain. This is episode 42, and today we're going to talk about some Spanish proverbs. I was just reading through a couple of the reviews that I get on Apple Podcasts for this podcast. A gentleman named Noidart Forever says, if you ever wanted to know more about Spain than just the headlines, Daniel has you covered. It's always a better day when this podcast drops. Thanks, brother. That is quite a great review. Thank you, Noidart Forever. I just googled Noidart. Apparently it is a peninsula in Scotland. Scotland's last wilderness, perhaps? I'm not sure. It's a peninsula. In any case, just like Spain is a peninsula on Europe. And I, of course, appreciate all the reviews. If you leave me a review on Apple Podcasts, I can read it. If you leave me some stars on Spotify, I am much appreciative. Either way, thank you very much for listening. So, it's been a while since I've done proverbs here. I actually did a podcast back in the day about Spanish proverbs. It is episode 21. 21 episodes ago. I did shocking Spanish proverbs which are not safe for work. I recorded that one about a year ago. And those are more of the scandalous, sexy proverbs about hookers, boobs, and pubic hair. These proverbs today have nothing to do with pubic hair. Although that was fun, these are ones that you might have more occasion to use in your day-to-day life. I'm totally not exaggerating about the pubic hair, by the way. Check out episode 21 if you want to know. But today, I thought I'd give you some common proverbs that are not grossing anyone out, that are not particularly sexist or sexy at all. I might expand this later on because there are hundreds of proverbs in Spanish, but for now, I've got the top 10. Quick disclaimer. I'm guessing that other Spanish-speaking countries use some of these proverbs, not all of them. I don't really know. Also, I'm guessing that people in Mexico, Colombia, Argentina, Peru, etc. all have their own proverbs that may be quite a bit different than the ones I know. And finally, I know my pronunciation is extremely sexy, but it's not necessarily 100% authentic. So please hire someone from Murcia to read these out loud if you have any doubts about my accent. Without further ado, let's talk about matar dos pájaros de un tiro. Matar dos pájaros de un tiro has a pretty literal translation to English. It is kill two birds with one stone. Tiro in Spanish is one shot. And with my apologies to vegan crybabies who are offended at the idea of shooting birds, I should explain that it refers to solving two problems at once. No actual birds were harmed in the making of this proverb. Seriously, though, have you seen those articles where vegans propose that certain English expressions are harmful to animals and you can't say ants in your pants or put all your eggs in one basket? What a bunch of whiners. Anyway, not to beat a dead horse here, but there's more than one way to skin a cat. And also more than one Spanish proverb about birds. Next one up is Más vale pájaro en mano que cien volando. We have an equivalent for this one in English as well. A bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. Más vale pájaro en mano que cien volando. The Spanish version has a bit of exaggeration that our English version doesn't. In Spain, a bird in the hand is worth 100 on the wing. Basically, this means that it's better to have one thing now than to believe some huge promises about the future, which may never happen. I guess economists might talk about the time value of money if they're expressing this concept. A similar expression apparently appears in Don Quixote, except that it's not 100 birds on the wing, but a single vulture. Buitre volando, in other words. More info about all these expressions and proverbs can be found on the Instituto Cervantes website. They have a special section about proverbs. Instituto Cervantes is the Spanish language organization that goes out and, opens up sort of embassies around the world, embassies for Spanish language and culture. I think it's attached to the Ministry of Culture or whatever here in Spain, but it's not an official embassy. When I took the DELE, which is the official certificate of Spanish language for my nationality process, I took it through the Instituto Cervantes. They also gave me the citizenship test, where I am expected to know things about Spanish culture for Spanish nationality. More about that on a future episode, I'm sure. Anyway, that is Más vale pájaro en mano que cien volando. Our next proverb is also slightly offensive to bears. It is no vendas la piel del oso antes de cazarlo. This means don't sell the skin of the bear before you hunt it. I've also seen this written as no vendas la piel del oso antes de haberlo matado. Don't sell the skin of the bear before having killed it, I guess, would be the literal translation. This one generally warns against excessive optimism about the future. Basically, it's don't count your chickens before they've hatched. Or perhaps I should say before they hatch in present. I've always hated that expression. I remember hearing it from my parents when I was a kid and thinking it just sounded like adults crushing my dreams. In any case, hunting bears is probably hard, so it makes sense. Just ask Cameron Haynes, the bow hunting icon who's got all your other favorite podcast bros out in the forest, shooting arrows at large animals and then eating their hearts, livers, and muscle meat, and Instagramming it. I guess eating bear liver is probably not vegan friendly either. I apologize. Do I get a pass for being an ex-vegetarian? You can check out episode 30 for more of my adventures with Spanish cuisine. Anyway, moving on to something slightly sexier, but not that sexy. Un clavo saca otro clavo. Literally, this is one nail removes another. Apparently in English, we can say one nail drives out another, although I've never heard anyone say it. The meaning is that a new problem will make you forget about your old problem. This proverb apparently goes all the way back to Aristotle, who said something similar long time ago. I've heard it specifically in the context of relationships. When girls break up with some dude and say, un clavo saca otro clavo, they mean that finding a new guy will make them forget about the old one. I always sort of assumed that the clavo represented a penis, but maybe that's just me and my sick mind. Officially, clavo is a nail. Another expression that you could say, por los clavos de Cristo, which is by Christ's nails. It's kind of an exclamation, for the love of God, for Christ's sake, por los clavos de Cristo. Anyway, before I offend some fragile penis phobe, let's move on. El mundo es un pañuelo. I didn't mention, but you can read all of these on the blog. I'll leave a link in the show notes to where you can find the article and read the sentences in Spanish, or just head past expatmadrid.com/proverbs. I'll set that link up. I'll have my massive team set that link up. My massive team is also me. Anyway, expatmadrid.com/proverbs. So, we were at El mundo es un pañuelo. It's a small world. Literally, pañuelo is a handkerchief. Something small and square. A limited space covered by it. So, when you run into somebody you know on the street, or it turns out that your new Tinder date is good friends with your ex, you can feel free to exclaim, Vaya, el mundo es un pañuelo. On that note, do you ever see these initiatives that pop up from time to time where women rate their ex-boyfriends online so that everyone on the planet can find out that, for example, William West from Chula Vista, California is the absolute worst? I wonder why those never really get any traction. Seems like there should be a thriving market for ex-gossip. On the other hand, it might just attract new fans for total douchebags. Even serial killers have groupies. Maybe old Will West is kinda hot and his bad boy vibe is attractive to some. What do I know? Small world, though. Anyway, al que madruga, Dios le ayuda. This is sort of like the English expression, the early bird gets the worm. Literally, it means that God helps the person who gets up early. The Spanish, of course, are notoriously late risers, at least in the big cities. It seems like nothing happens before about 11 a.m. on Saturdays or Sundays, for example. Even Orwell talks about this in Homage to Catalonia. When he was on the run from the Stalinists, he couldn't get a coffee anywhere before 9 a.m. He was sleeping on the street, and he particularly says that's the worst part about being homeless in Spain. Anyway, that was Orwell. A quien madruga, Dios le ayuda is another way of saying this. Previously, I said al que madruga, Dios le ayuda. They're both acceptable variations. The difference between lo and le as Spanish pronouns is complicated. Dios le ayuda, Dios lo ayuda. A teacher tried to explain the difference between lo and le to me back in 2006 or so, and I didn't get it then, and I still don't get it now. It doesn't help, of course, that every region of Spain seems to have a different way of using or misusing these pronouns, le, lo, and la. Officially, this is called leísmo, laísmo, and loísmo, and they are grammatical errors, but that's probably not important unless you want to be a serious grammar nerd. Since my main language learning method is listening to people, and I talk to people from all kinds of places, I have no idea how this works because everybody uses it wrong. Next proverb. No por mucho madrugar, amanece más temprano. This sounds like basically the opposite of the previous one. In any case, it doesn't actually refer to getting up early. The literal translation is not by getting up early all the time will you make the sun rise sooner, let's say. Getting up early every day won't make the sun rise any faster. Something like that. What it really means, though, is that you can't rush things, that working harder or starting earlier may not help in every case because some things just take time. The Spanish have a few interesting verbs like madrugar. Madrugar is to get up early. Verbs that talk about the lack of sleep. For example, trasnochar, which is to stay up all night. And also, I think this is more colloquial, empalmar, which is to spend the night at the club and go to work the next day without sleeping. Those are very specific, especially that last one, and not uncommon if you live in Madrid with its famous nightlife. I never did this, but I do know that some of my coworkers back in the day in Madrid would occasionally do it. Party all night and go to work the next day. Next one is ojos que no ven, corazón que no siente. This is out of sight, out of mind. Literally, the translation is, if the eyes don't see, the heart doesn't feel. Apparently, the Don Quixote version of this one is ojos que no ven, corazón que no quiebra. In other words, if the eyes don't see, the heart doesn't break. It's been a long, long time since I've read Don Quixote, but I do seem to remember that his little buddy Sancho Panza was muy refranero, that he had a proverb for any situation. If you have the level of Spanish for it, Don Quixote is actually pretty good in Spanish. I guess it's pretty good in English too. I don't know. They came out with a definitive translation about 20 years ago for the 400th anniversary of Volume 1. That's the one that I read. Next one is, Dime con quien andas y te diré quién eres. This is basically, tell me who you hang out with and I'll tell you who you are. This one means that we tend to become more like the people who we hang out with, the implication being that we should be careful about who we hang out with. Allegedly, this is called the 5 chimps theory. Motivational speaker extraordinaire Jim Rohn back in the day would say that you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. It's based on the idea that chimpanzees, or people, will develop a personality resembling that of the others around them. So don't be a chimp and pick your friends wisely. Finally, ending with one of my favorites. Adiós rogando y con el mazo dando. This is, like I said, a proverb that I like quite a bit. There are several English versions of this one. I like trust in God and tie up your camel, which is not exactly the same thing, but it's close. It basically means praying to God and pounding with the mallet. That's the literal translation. The aforementioned Instituto Cervantes suggests God helps them that help themselves, and pray to God and keep hammering as translations for that. Basically, it means that you can pray to God, but you should also do the work. You can't expect big things without doing the work. Adiós rogando y con el mazo dando. Mazo, as it turns out, is actually a mallet. I always assumed it was the mace, the weapon from the Middle Ages, but today I learned that it is a mallet. Because, of course, mace, the weapon, is matha, not matho. I know. It's fun when these words have completely different meanings if you change the O to an A on the end of them. I think I did a podcast about that. Spanish words and gender back in the day. That is probably one of the first 15 or so episodes I did. Oh, I don't know. Maybe I never did that one. I'm looking right now. Oh, episode 5. Spanish words and gender. Those are other words that change completely if you change the O to an A or vice versa. Anyway, I hope you have enjoyed this episode 42. I also hope that you take some time to learn some Spanish if you are visiting a Spanish-speaking country. Spain is great, and you will have a better experience if you speak some Spanish. It doesn't have to be a high level, but it is a very interesting language. There's a lot of culture behind it. Expressions like this are part of that culture. Anyway, the final question. I've heard that some of these colloquial expressions are dying out with time. I have a couple of reasons why that could be. One of them is that Granny is in an old age home and the kids are out standing in line to go to brunch and cake on weekends. They're getting their life wisdom from 16-year-olds on TikTok, and they're not really in touch with expressions like this. These expressions, a lot of them have to do with the concerns of people living out in the country anyway, and a lot of that vocabulary just does not apply to an urban environment. I was looking at pictures of mallets for a while this morning before I remembered even what the English word was for mallet, because I just don't use them much. And there are other expressions using other vocabulary that just doesn't make a ton of sense if you're not in a rural environment. So some of them are going the way of the dodo, as it were, but others are certainly hanging on. These ones that I've taught you today are still pretty common. Anyway, I hope you have a great day wherever you are in the world. Please subscribe to the podcast. Leave me a review, as I mentioned before. Head to expatmadrid.com/proverbs to read the sentences here. There's also links to some interesting things that I've mentioned. You could check out expatmadrid.com/donate. That is logically the page where I ask you for a financial contribution. I've got bills, and more bills here from the tax people. I am freelance in Spain, which if you have been freelance in Spain or known any freelancers in Spain, you would know that it is expensive. So feel free to swing by expatmadrid.com/donate, buy me a virtual coffee or something. I appreciate it. I've written a lot of books. They're on Amazon. If you're listening to this, you probably don't need them because they are for English learners. And if you're listening to this, I'm sure you have a very good level of English. Anyway, you might buy them for your cousin Florentino or something who doesn't speak English. You could buy him 10 copies if you wanted, and that would help out as well. Anyway, I hope you are enjoying your day wherever you are in the world. From beautiful Barcelona, hasta la próxima. Bye.